This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. The fiscal cliff was avoided, but the bitter negotiations between the president and lawmakers have left Washington even more divided. Battles over government spending aren't the only fights looming. Preparing to start his second term, President Barack Obama faces opposition to choices for key cabinet positions, and a presidential push for gun control is sure to be contentious. How will a new season of Gridlock affect the U.S. at home and in its relations with the rest of the world? I'll ask my guest, Nick Schultz, editor-in-chief of the internet magazine American.com and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. So this week, the president announced a nominee for Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, somebody who is a Republican, but who is facing a lot of opposition from Republican lawmakers. Is that a sense of the bitter partisanship that continues to build in Washington?
Well, to some extent, yes. I mean, some would say this is the president reaching out, taking a member of the opposition party to bring into his cabinet. But Chuck Hagel has been at odds with many Republicans, many people in his own party for a long time. He even endorsed President Obama back in 2008 over the Republican candidate at the time. And there have been serious differences between Hagel and other Republicans on issues relating to the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, U.S. relations with Israel and other allies in critical regions. So it was in choosing Hagel, and there was a lot of back and forth, people sort of speculating what it might mean before he was chosen, but now that he's chosen, President Obama clearly knows he's going to be a contentious possible nominee, and he's ready to pick a fight, and he's ready for it.
Now, all the fights that have been going on in Washington, a lot of foreign policy issues, it's been fairly quiet for the first term of the Obama presidency, and yet we see now building disputes on foreign policy questions. It looked as though President Obama was going to appoint UN Ambassador Susan Rice to be Secretary of State to take over for Hillary Rodham Clinton, but that ended up getting pulled after a dispute involving the killing of the ambassador in Libya. Are we going to see a lot more contentious fights over foreign policy issues in this coming term than we saw in the first term?
I think we might, and this would be not without precedent. For whatever reason it is in the United States, a lot of times a president in his first term will be consumed with domestic policy issues, and certainly that was true in this case. But many times presidents in their second term, they turn towards foreign policy, they become more interested in foreign policy issues, and there's no shortage of big issues that are going to be coming up. So these early skirmishes that we're seeing over Rice as a possible nominee, now with Chuck Hagel, and there will be other foreign policy picks. Cabinet and other picks that I think will be contentious as well. I think we're going to see a lot of skirmishing between Obama and Republicans on foreign policy.
And will the hearings for the nomination of Chuck Hagel become a sort of seminar where we're going to see what the divisions between the Republicans and the Democrats are going to be over foreign policy?
Yeah, I think we will. And one interesting wrinkle to it is that because he comes out of the Senate. Usually there's this tradition that, well, he's a senator and he knows his Senate colleagues. And
it's the Senate where a nominee is confirmed.
Right. And so it will be his fellow senators who will be asking him questions, and that will create an interesting dynamic there. But there's no love lost between Chuck Hagel and many of the Republicans who will be questioning him, and also some Democrats as well. Senator Charles Schumer, who's a Democrat, has his own issues with Chuck Hagel. So it's by no means just Republicans who have their problems with President Obama. There are a lot of issues on which Chuck Hagel is not well liked, both by Republicans but also by some Democrats.
Let's talk a bit about the big picture. 4 years ago, President Obama coming in as a new president with a Congress dominated by his own party. 2 years ago, a new Congress coming in And so again, no real expectation of exactly what the state of play would be. But this time around, we have a president who's not a new president, and we have a Congress that's pretty much like the previous Congress. And so we have a situation in which the sort of bad blood built up over the last few years is looking like it may continue unabated.
It continue unabated also because if you're President Obama, you say to yourself, look, I was reelected, and so that's an affirmation of what of my first 4 years, that the American people embraced that and want a continuation of that. But if you're Republicans in Congress who were running against Obama's legislative agenda, you say to yourself, well, look, we were given the House of Representatives again. We were reelected. And so they don't see much reason, having their constituents sent them back into their positions in the House of Representatives to say, well, we're just going to roll over and do anything that President Obama wants. And then you've had this bad blood between the two sides building up for some time. So you saw a little bit of that with the skirmish over the fiscal cliff that you mentioned at the outset, but you're going to see this going forward with a number of issues that are going to be coming up even in the early part of this year.
Now, a lot of these, this bad blood has built up over negotiations where the White House and lawmakers have tried to get together outside of the process of Capitol Hill, of passing laws, and come together with a deal that can be packaged up and taken through and passed. This week, Speaker of the House John Boehner said that he now sees as the worst thing that he's done, his worst mistake, is entering into negotiations, and that he thinks that from now on, and what he should have been doing all along, is just saying we're going to follow the strict process of the legislature and not try to short-circuit it by coming to deals. What does that look like if the process becomes the sort of formal process rather than something, an informal process of deal making?
Well, what it looks like is that not a lot will get done. I mean, there is gridlock in Washington. In a certain sense, that's what the American people voted for. They returned a sitting Democratic president for a second term, but they also sent a Republican Congress back, and so they in effect voted for gridlock. So you could say this is, in a certain strange sense, even though everybody always complains, well, we want Washington to get things done, the way the table is set, there isn't much that can get done. Now, with this fiscal cliff situation that just passed, there were these questions of expiring tax cuts and all of these things on a that were happening at a certain date. So there was a sense in which, well, maybe both sides would get together to try to reach a deal before we got to this, very beginning of the year when these new tax increases were set to go in. But for the rest of the just sort of regular legislative agenda or the president's agenda, most of those sorts of time-burdened issues don't exist. And so the Republicans' willingness to rubber stamp whatever this president wants, that's just not going to be there. So I think you're seeing this set up for a very, very contentious next couple of years.
Now, is it going to be contentious in the sense that these issues are going to keep coming up and being hard fought, or will they just be pushed down the road and the issues not taken up at all?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, you do have some things coming up. For example, you have this issue of the United States having to raise its debt level, its debt limit. So currently the United States has a set debt limit and it can't go above that. If it's going to meet its obligations, Congress needs to approve raising the debt level. Now, this Republican Congress is going to want to do that by getting some concessions out of the president. They're going to say, hey, we agreed to a tax increase that you wanted, that you said was part of your mandate as having won re-election, but now we hold some cards here. We are only going to raise this debt level if you agree to some serious spending reductions, because the Republicans are looking out and saying the United States has a very dire fiscal situation if you look out over the long term, so they're really going to want to start acting on this now. So you're going to have these fights coming up pretty soon, and you're going to see Republicans who I think say that they have a firmer negotiating hand and they might be able to get some of the things that they want done.
What does this mean for the U.S. ability to act abroad in the world, does it have ramifications beyond just Washington, beyond just the U.S.? The Economist magazine wrote this week that national security is not just about the number of tanks or rockets you have. Why should developing countries trust American leadership when it seems incapable of solving anything at home?
Well, one reason it should is that the United States is still and will be for the foreseeable future the most important global power, and that's not changing anytime soon. So what the U.S. wants to do will matter just about everywhere and to everyone. What's interesting sort of longer term is this question about the U.S. fiscal situation and the need for either cutting its spending domestically on its social programs, on its welfare programs and the like, or what President Obama has suggested and some Democrats, cutting defense spending. And that, when you're talking about projecting power overseas, when you're talking about being able to be engaged in all corners of the globe at the same time, if you're talking at the same time about reining in your spending on defense and reining in what your ambitions are around the world, there could be very big ramifications there. And this is one area where we're going to see the fight over Chuck Hagel, because there are a number of Republicans who aren't interested in severe cuts to military spending, who want a forward posture for the United States around the world, to be engaged around the world, in Asia, in Latin America, and are going to resist the Obama administration's desire to bring things a little bit closer to home. So we're going to see these fights this year.
Nick Schultz is editor-in-chief of the internet magazine American.com and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks so much for joining us.